on the plane. The guide complimented my pronunciation and said I had a good ear for the language. That made me feel proud despite the awful scene Linda just caused. Bobby pointed at different statues and asked questions about what they meant. Tom took pictures with his phone and made jokes about how we'd remember this trip forever. When we finished the tour and met back up with Frank and Linda near the entrance, my mother's eyes were red like she'd been crying. Her face was set in this tight, angry expression with her jaw clenched. Frank thanked the guide again and pulled out some bills to tip her. The guide bowed and thanked him and gave me a small smile before she left. Frank said we were heading back to the hotel because we all needed to talk as a family. The taxi ride back was completely silent except for Bobby trying to make small talk about what we saw at the temple. He talked about the statues and the gardens and how cool the architecture was. Linda stared out the window, refusing to look at any of us. Frank kept glancing at her with this disappointed expression I'd never seen him wear before. His mouth was pressed into a thin line and his hands were folded in his lap. Tom sat next to me in the back seat and our shoulders touched. At the hotel, Frank asked Tom and Bobby to give us an hour alone in his and Linda's room. The boys both hugged me before they left. Tom whispered that whatever happened, they were on my side. He said nothing. Linda said would change how they felt about me. Bobby squeezed my hand and told me it would be okay. The door closed behind them and suddenly the room felt too small and too quiet. In the hotel room, Frank sat Linda and me down on opposite ends of the bed. He pulled a chair from the desk and sat facing us. He said we were going to have an honest conversation about what had been happening since he married Linda. Linda jumped in right away and said I was too sensitive. She said she'd been nothing but welcoming and I was making problems out of nothing. Frank held up his hand and cut her off. He started listing specific examples of her behavior that excluded me. He brought up the fake grandmother illness and how he'd called his mom to check on her. He mentioned the airline ticket lie and how he'd confirmed all 5 tickets were valid. He talked about the wrong terminal number and how I'd almost missed the flight. He listed every attempt Linda made to keep me from this trip. Linda's face went pale as he kept talking. Her hands started shaking in her lap and she wouldn't look at either of us. I started talking, and once I began, I couldn't stop. I told Frank about the time Linda said I was grounded when really the boys wanted me to go to a baseball game with them. I told him about how she'd claim I was sick when they went out for pizza. I told him about every movie I missed because Linda suddenly remembered chores I needed to finish. My voice got stronger as I listed each excuse she'd made to keep me away from them. Linda opened her mouth to interrupt, but Frank held up his hand without looking at her. He kept his eyes on me and told her she'd get her turn after I finished. I kept going and told him about the phone calls to my room saying dinner was canceled when really they were eating without me. I told him about the times she'd give me the wrong address for Bobby's soccer games so I'd show up at empty fields. Linda's face went from red to pale as I kept talking. Her hands twisted in her lap, and she looked like she wanted to disappear into the hotel bed. When I finally stopped talking, the room was so quiet I could hear people walking past our door in the hallway. Frank turned to Linda and asked if she had anything to say. Linda's face crumpled and